Now to Syria, where opposition activists say insurgents are pushing ahead with their offensive against government forces, are capturing more towns and closing in on the city of Hama. State troops say they've retaken some territory lost in last week's surprise attack when the alliance of rebel groups took the country's second city, Aleppo. The United Nations says nearly 50,000 people have been displaced by this latest fighting.
In a sign of disdain for the regime, a sculpture of President Bashar al-Assad's late brother is toppled by protesters in Aleppo. Syria's second-largest city and several surrounding areas are now under rebel control after a surprise offensive led by the Islamist rebel group Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS, as well as opposition fighters backed by Turkey. This footage, filmed by the militants, shows them entering what's believed to be President Assad's palace in Aleppo. And insurgents were also seen at the city's international airport, which they claim to have seized with almost no opposition from government forces. As rebel groups intensify their assault, thousands of civilians are fleeing the fighting in Aleppo and other areas in the north. Getting to safety is a challenge. You don't know who anybody is. You might find ISIS cells on the road. There could be shooting because the Syrian army are no longer deployed here. These are the risks we may face. The Syrian army is trying to break the insurgents' momentum with support from Russian warplanes and its allies among Iran-backed militias. But with Tehran and Moscow mired in their own conflicts, President Assad may not be able to depend on as much support from them as he would like.
We'll take a closer look with Fabrice Balanche, who's an associate professor and research director at the University of Lyon, where he specialises in the geopolitics of the Middle East. Welcome to DW. Where do you see this offensive going from here? Momentum seems to be with the rebels.
Yes, so after Halep, the coalition is going to Hama, but I know that they are probably taking the city of Hama very soon, because the Syrian army is not able to protect the city and to fix the insurgent. Probably they will are going to create a front line between Homs and Hama, a little bit on the south, because the population around Homs is more favorable in favor of the regime. They are Alawite, Christian, Ismaili, and they don't like this coalition composed by jihadists and Islamists who are coming from Idlib.
Right. And the response of the regime is interesting. Firstly, them being taken by surprise, and secondly, the counterattack seeming weaker than one would have expected.
It's not. It was not really a surprise, because 2 months ago the regime sent troops to Aleppo because they understood that Hayat al-Sham wanted to launch an offensive against Aleppo. So it was not a surprise. But the regime front line collapsed very quickly. First, because the jihadists used kamikazes against the front line. They sent trucks with suicide drivers, as they have done by the past, like Daesh in many cases. And it was a panic for the Syrian army. The Syrian army, deprived from the support of Hezbollah, from the support of the Shia militia, the pro-Iranian militia coming from Iraq, is not enough strong to resist to this wave of jihadists and rebels supported by Turkey.
Let's talk about these jihadists and rebels. So what we understand is a group of them, led by this HTS group, united in their opposition to the Assad regime. But that alliance does seem fragile.
Fragile, yes, because HTS and the rebel from the so-called National Syrian Army, which is a Turkish proxies, are hostile. There was a fight before between them. But HTS, with his jihadist ally like Hurasaddin, like the Uyghur from the Islamist Party of the Turkestan, 2 groups who belong to Al-Qaeda, are very close together and very, very efficient on the ground. So they are able to lead a coalition and to make progress on the ground without the support of the National Syrian Army, which is not so efficient.
And a word then about the likely wider repercussions of this upsurge in fighting in Syria. How does that change things?
So now the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham control Aleppo, 10,000 square kilometers on the northwest, probably Hama tomorrow. And this is a real game changer in Syria, because the regime was in a way of rehabilitation. If you remember that Bashar al-Assad was invited at the Arab League last year, and many even European countries wanted to make contacts with him, as Italy, Greece, Hungary, about the problem of the migrant,
Right.
and just because he was stronger. So no, we see that he's very weak, and probably he will be removed from the power by force or by Russia and Iran, who think that he's not probably anymore suitable for control the regime.
We'll leave it there. Thank you so much, Fabrice Balanche from the University of Lyon.
My colleague Gasia Ohanes grew up in Aleppo and has reported extensively for us on the Syrian crisis. Gasia, thanks so much for coming into the studio. Can you explain the significance of the rebels' moves now towards Hama?
Hama has a major strategic significance for Syria's government, and the armed rebels that are making their way there know this. That's why they're heading there. And the reason that they could capture Aleppo within days was because there were a lot of withdrawals of regime fighters, so government forces, from Aleppo as they made their way through with this surprise offensive. And a lot of those troops are said to now be in Hama, trying to defend the city for the government. And the reason for this is that Hama is not just a barrier for the government, which is in Damascus, from the opposition in the north all the way to Idlib, but it's also a major corridor that links Damascus to the Syrian coast. That's where Russia has a port. That's where Russia has a military air base. So if they want to send reinforcements, that corridor is extremely important. And it also links to Latakia, which is the government's loyalist base. That's where a lot of Alawites are. That's the sect of the Syrian president. So if the fighting moves there and the government has to defend those people, that route is especially important.
Okay, so massive strategic importance.
Yeah.
What about the people, the tens of thousands of Syrians who are now essentially being forced to flee the violence if they can? What about them? Who's taking care of them?
Civilians face many challenges in fleeing this conflict. First, from the barrel bombs that are falling because the government is bombing the areas that are being taken over by the rebels. Then, while they're fleeing, they face crossfire. There's been, unfortunately, several cases of civilian casualties that were trying to evacuate and were shot. There was a Syrian Armenian doctor who died on the way. There's been Kurdish civilians that were confirmed to have been killed on the way. So right now, the Kurdish area, which is in the the northeast of Syria, they've said that they're setting up a camp of sorts to support up to 120,000 displaced people that they're expecting from Aleppo, and that they say is only the first wave. So there's going to be a mass displacement from this.
So essentially there's not enough support for the people who are going to need help.
At the moment, there isn't, and there's a lot of calls from these areas to have just that from the international community.
Can we talk about the idea that this new rebel alliance may actually have a chance of forming a functional government in Syria? Is there any chance that that could happen as a result of what's happening now?
There are many questions on how a group that is fundamentally extremist, and some of these factions in this coalition that they have are designated terror groups. So there's many questions on how they can govern a country, how secular life can exist under such a government if they were to take over, and especially concerns for women and minorities. Now, on the political side, the Turkish-backed rebels are not going to get along with the Kurdish side of this conflict, which, Kurds control the east of Syria. They're backed by the US, the coalition. So they're now concerned that if the regime is ever out of the picture, these two groups are going to be fighting each other.
Gasia, Ohanes, thank you so much for bringing us up to date.